We've got to get the gospel right. There's just too much hanging in the balance for modification or error. If you modify the gospel, if you nuance it in a certain way to make it more palatable to the hearer, then you perhaps run the risk of losing the very power of the gospel. The greatest threat that's facing American Christianity isn't liberalism or even an attack on the inspiration of Scripture. The greatest problem we've been facing for the last 60 years is the desire to be successful. We want to be approved and popular with the society in which we find ourselves in. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be successful. Nobody starts out with the goal to be a failure. However, if you're going to be successful in gospel ministry, you need to begin with being right with the gospel. Validity of the gospel. Validity, faithfulness to it, is how God deems success in the ministry. That's how you get the whole book of Jude. Jude is writing, and he says he wants to write about the common salvation of us all, but he feels directed to something more important. And then he begins to exhort Christians to contend earnestly for the faith once and for all delivered to the saints. Once and for all delivered. That means the gospel's not a work in progress. You're not going to get an addendum later on. It's complete. It's what we find in the Scriptures. That's why the Apostle Paul says something very frighteningly simple. He said, if we, or an angel from heaven, preach to you any other gospel than that which we preached unto you, let him be accursed. Why would Paul say something so provocative, so dogmatic? Because he knew there was a lot at stake. Today, American evangelicals are faced with a question, especially those who want to be successful. Do we run the risk of telling the whole truth at the expense of offending most people, or do we make slight modifications? Do we simply leave out parts that are not very tasteful to the hearer in order that we make the gospel more appealing? What would Paul have done? You know, he said that the gospel itself, the preaching of the cross, is foolishness to the Greeks. In other words, he meant that it was nonsensical. It's silly to the hearer when they first hear the gospel. You tell me I need something, that I'm not right, I'm less than perfect. That's very offensive to people. And so what did Paul do? Did he gather his preaching protégés together and say, you know, we need to retool our presentation. We need to contextualize even more to the culture? No, that's not what he did. He goes on to say, but we preach Christ. To the Jews, a stumbling block. In other words, an offense. You see, Paul realized that if you modify the gospel in the least, you run the risk of modifying the very power of the gospel. The gospel inherently is naturally controversial. It offends everybody that hears it. The only people that don't get offended by the gospel are Christians. No, Paul went on to say, we preach Christ. I save to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. This conference is not about preaching against evangelism. It's for the purpose of genuine, successful evangelism. We're not attacking large churches. By no means. Paul said that there is power in the gospel if it's faithfully adhered to. We believe that if the gospel's presented the way the Bible presents the gospel, people will be converted. How can you argue against gospel success when on the day of Pentecost, one sermon brought 3,000 people to Christ? And so the decision most evangelicals are making today is leaving Christianity in a sad state. Many are opting to modify the gospel basically by leaving certain parts unsaid. That's what this conference is all about. We want to invite you to be a part of this conference to hear the whole truth and nothing but the truth. It's said in courtrooms every day, if it's not all the truth, then it isn't the truth at all. Some of you are sitting in churches every Sunday, and you hear things that are basically right. Some of the modifications that's happened in this last 3-4 decades haven't been blatant lies. It's simply we don't say everything. Many of you sit in churches and everything that's said is the truth. But there are a lot of things going unsaid. Some things are just not thoroughly explained, leaving people thinking they have a Christianity, they've been converted, they have the gospel, when the truth is they really haven't. That's why we're inviting you, October the 11th, this fall 2008, Saturday, 10 a.m. through 4 p.m., to the Cherry Civic Center. I want to invite all Christians to attend and find out the whole truth so that you're sure when you share your faith, you're giving nothing but the truth. I want to invite those who profess to be Christians, but you're not. Oh, you think you are, but the truth is you aren't, because you've heard an adaptation of the gospel. You've been given a false impression. You've believed it all right, but it doesn't save. Some of you are just like me. I grew up in a conservative Bible-believing church. I heard what I thought was the gospel, and I believed it. But I wasn't converted. I want you to be there so you can hear nothing but the truth. I want to invite pastors and church leaders to attend. Let's start a dialogue. Let's begin a conversation about what is the gospel. What are the essential elements of that gospel message so that we can all be preaching the same truth? Let's let the conversation begin and let iron sharpen iron. And then I want to lastly invite Christians who are sitting in churches that are footloose and fancy-free with the truth. You sit Sunday after Sunday and you know something is wrong. You just can't put your finger on it. You need to be at this conference to find out just what it is that's missing. And so I want to direct your attention to the registration page at this website. It's absolutely free to you. We'll even provide a free lunch. But we do need you to register to reserve a place for you. The Cherry Civic Center only has so much seating. So please register. Jesus died, and He suffered so much for us. It seems that we should then, therefore, take every painstaking effort to understand what He died for, because real truth matters.